Hello everyone, today we'll be talking about the role of shear stress in clotting and bleeding. Have you wondered, in some clotting issues we use anticoagulation like heparin, while in other clotting issues we use antiplatelet agents like aspirin and sometimes both. And this is not random, there is a very simple pathophysiology behind all this. Also, have you wondered why LVADs have both bleeding and clotting issues and why atherosclerosis occurs more commonly at bifurcations? And all this has to do with shear stress. This is the one of the topic not very well covered in the medical school when they cover bleeding and clotting. So let's dive into details about this topic. So welcome to my channel. On this channel, we dive into pathophysiology and mechanisms behind everyday clinical phenomenon. While most of the educators are trying to make a complex things simple, I want to keep this complexity while being intuitive and clinically useful. I want to discuss all the moving parts. My goal is to show you that medicine is not so simple as most of us assume. So let's get started. So shear stress is the force applied to the blood flow to the vessel area, and this is due to the velocity differences between the layers. So slower the next layer velocity is, the more the gradient, therefore higher the shear. So your shear stress depends upon velocity gradient and also on viscosity. In laminar flow, the wall shear stress depends upon the blood flow rate and is inversely proportional to the third power of vessel wall radius. Shear stress and resistance have similar looking formulas, but they are not the same. So wall shear stress increases with flow and decreases with stasis. However, if you keep on increasing the flow, a point is going to come where the laminar flow will change into turbulent flow. Turbulent flow is important because the velocity drops much more sharply and the velocity gradient near the wall is much steeper. So turbulent flow gives rise to higher shear. However, this is not the main thing with the turbulent flow. The main reason why turbulent flow causes issues in human body is because the shear rapidly changes the direction, and this is the key problem with the turbulence. The shear stress depends upon the inverse of vessel wall radius, so it is higher in arterioles than the arteries. Shear stress also depends upon the viscosity, and the blood viscosity contribution is maximum by the RBCs. So patients with anemia will have a lower viscosity than patients with polycythemia. Plasma proteins like albumin and fibrinogen accounts for around 10 to 15%. However, certain paraproteinemias, such as seen in your Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia or multiple myeloma, they can increase your blood viscosity by quite a bit. Platelets and white cell count contributes minimally to blood viscosity. The role of shear stress in clotting and bleeding is complex, so I'll go slowly. Shear is continuously felt by glycocalyx, and there are mechanosensitive channels on the endothelium, which via PKM1 pathway and calcium calmodulin pathway upregulates COX-1 and 2 and stimulates your endothelial nitric oxide synthase. This results in a continuous production of nitric oxide and prostacyclin. Both of them cause platelet inhibition and vasodilation. There are many other mechanisms by which shear keeps the antithrombotic tone in the blood vessels. So bottom line is moderate shear keeps antithrombotic tone, anti-inflammatory tone, and keeps your smooth muscle relaxed. Role of shear is more important on the arterial side than venous side. So whatever we'll be discussing in the further slides would apply to the arteries and the arterioles. The shear effect depends upon the direction of flow. So as the flow rate increases, the degree of dilation increases because nitric oxide levels in the blood increase with increased shear. However, if you reverse the flow in the same artery, even despite the increase in flow rate, there is no increased production of nitric oxide, so there is no dilatation. The other factor that affects your vasodilation is your NADPH oxidase. NADPH oxidase makes superoxide radicals, which neutralizes your nitric oxide. So arterial endothelium constantly feeds the flow and maintains its antithrombotic properties from nitric oxide and prostaglandin I2. And in low and oscillatory shear, which is caused by turbulence, you lose this protective response. So the atherosclerosis occurs at bifurcation because on the outer walls at bifurcation, the flow becomes chaotic, slow, and becomes oscillatory. The cranial area, however, has high shear forces. So in this study, they looked at the plaque thickness and necrotic core thickness, and you can see that plaque thickness and necrotic cores are much larger in low shear oscillatory areas. So low average shear magnitude and large oscillatory changes during the cardiac cycle is recognized as atheroprone hemodynamic phenotype. There's another type of stress that comes with every pulse, that's a circumferential stress, and it depends upon the pressure and the radius and inversely proportional to the wall thickness. And this is important in atherosclerosis development and plaque ruptures and also arterial aneurysms. Circumferential stress is important because this, along with the shear stress, work to keep the redox signaling of your endothelium in balance. So we learned that shear stress is atheroproductive by increasing your nitric oxide and prostaglandin I2 and is a vasodilator. However, the circumferential stretch also works on the endothelium and it stimulates the production of angiotensin II by the endothelial cells. Endothelial cells also has angiotensin converting enzyme and can convert angiotensin I to angiotensin II. And there are 81 receptors on these results in stimulation of formation of NADPH oxidase, which results in formation of free oxygen radicals. Similar process occur in your vascular smooth muscle cell as well. There are other pathways and they also result in stimulation of NADPH oxidase. Now, this side of the cycle is pro-inflammatory signaling. So it increases your endothelial dysfunction, atherosclerosis initiation, and smooth muscle hypertrophy. Shear stress, on the other hand, inhibits the AT1 receptors. The free oxide radicals will neutralize the nitric oxide, and the combination of these two therefore maintains your vascular tone. So that is how the normal shear stress helps. Higher shear stress also has physiological function in clot formation in the arteries. We learned in the previous lecture that if your blood vessels are damaged, they develop vasoconstriction, and this results in increased shear stress. High shear is required to activate von Willebrand factor and platelet, and this becomes important in your arteries and arterioles. So at higher shear stress between 100 to 150, your von Willebrand factor dependent adhesion begins. Shear stress unfolds von Willebrand factor and activates the A1 domain. So when your arteries vasoconstrict, they increase the velocity gradient that results in increased wall shear. This is important because it helps unfolding von Willebrand factor and helps in platelet plaque formation in the area of injury. Von Willebrand factor is a pretty long chain molecule with multiple domains with multiple activities. In the endoplasmic reticulum, these molecules form dimer using disulfide bridges. As they proceed to Golgi bodies, the lower pH polymerizes them. These are then stored in Weber palette bodies in your endothelium. Von Willebrand factor acts like a zipper. So in areas of increased shear, they unzip and they expose their A1 domain. And this domain is important because it adheres to the platelet to form platelet plug. This also gives access to ADAMTS13, which breaks them apart into oligomers. Two factors make von Willebrand factor very sticky. First, exposing their A1 domain, and second, long polymer chain are more sticky than oligomers. Now, this is important. Platelets have two receptors that bind to von Willebrand factor. One of them is your glycoprotein 2B3A, which unfortunately breaks under high shear, and this is useful in clot formation in areas with low shear, and it interacts with fibrinogen. In arteries, the platelet interacts with von Willebrand factor by a totally different receptor. It's a glycoprotein 1B, which is designed to work under high stress. So for a good clot formation in the arteries or arterioles or high shear areas, you need this interaction. We'll see how the difference between these two will help you understand difference between platelet function assay and platelet mapping. So a von Willebrand factor deficiency or platelet dysfunction will result in bleeding in high shear areas or the arteries. And sometimes in patients with ECMO or alveoles, when von Willebrand factor becomes dysfunctional, you can see this persistent ooze even from the minor trauma. Uremia impairs the von Willebrand factor by oxidizing it, so the von Willebrand factor doesn't open properly in the shear stress, and that can sometimes result in bleeding issues in uremia. Now, moderate shear prevents plaque formation, but high shear stress can cause plaque rupture. And then high shear stress can continue to initiate clot formation and blockages. And this is the mechanism behind most of the acute myocardial infarction and ischemic stroke. So whenever your arteries have high circumferential stress, these can sometimes lead to plaque rupture, and increased shear in this area continues with von Willebrand factor unfolding, which can cause platelet aggregation and development of subsequent thrombus. Circumferential stress is more important in plaque rupture. Since circumferential stress depends upon the radius, the relative radius when your plaques are only 30 to 50% is much higher than when they are 70 to 90%. The shear stress is much higher in the 70 to 90%. However, as the blocks increase, the flow drops, thereby decreasing the wall shear stress. The plaques that are more severe have extensive calcification and a fibrous remodeling with thicker cap, so this makes them more stable. As the shear increases, it also activates platelets. So shear above 150 to 200 can activate platelets by itself. This happens because platelets also have piezo 1 channels, which can result in calcium influx and stimulate the platelets. Also, under pathological shear, glycoprotein 1b alpha and alpha 2 B3 integrin are also activated. Now, when the shear continues to increase, very, very high shear can result in pathological activation and damage to the vessel wall. Excessive shear forces can hyper unfold von Willebrand factor. So this exposes your E2 domain, and this makes it easier for ADAMTS13 to cleave the polymer into oligomers. This can lead to depletion of von Willebrand factor stores, leading to von Willebrand factor deficiency, and this can lead to bleeding. There's also non-enzymatic degradation. Shear stress by itself can tear the von Willebrand factor multimers into smaller multimers. Some aortic stenosis patients come with unexplained bleeding. These patients have high shear stress and can have some degree of the physiology that we just discussed. This is called acquired von Willebrand syndrome, type 2A. In LVAD, shear stress can be very high, and this hyper unfolds von Willebrand factor, resulting in their destruction and subsequent von Willebrand factor deficiency and therefore bleeding tendencies. These patients also develop angiodysplasias. That's why their rate of GI bleed is pretty high, to the order of 20 to 40%. However, LVADs also have higher clotting rate as well, because the shear stress from the LVADs can activate platelets. It also stimulates intrinsic pathway from surface activation. Therefore, the rate of pump thrombosis and stroke is also pretty high. So you need anticoagulation and antiplatelets when you manage your LVADs. Bleeding and clotting depends upon how much shear that LVAD is generating. So is there a way to clinically judge the bad effect of shear on a patient? Well, shear also causes hemolysis. So you can use the plasma-free hemoglobin or haptoglobin to figure out if you are dealing with problem with high shear stresses. This can add to your clinical suspicion because hemolysis can be easily tested. However, the hemolysis also depend upon the duration of shear, so it may not always correlate that well. Is there a test that can assess for the shear aspect of the clotting pathway? And there's a test called platelet functional assay, PFA 100 or PFA 200, which measures the time to platelet plug formation under high shear. And this is looking at the interaction between your von Willebrand factor and glycoprotein 1b. In this test, a saturated whole blood is pushed through a capillary under a constant negative pressure, and this can reach up to shear stress up to 100 to 300 dyne per centimeter square. There is a microscopic aperture, and this can be coated with agonists like epinephrine or ADP. And this high shear in this cartridge would unfold the von Willebrand factor, which will bind to the collagen and the platelets and tether it with your glycoprotein 1b. And you can look at the closure time for this occlusion. That will give you how well this mechanism is working. So if your PFA 100 is normal, that means your primary hemostasis is likely intact. If it is prolonged, it means that patient cannot exploit the shear forces between your von Willebrand factor and the platelet to stop the bleeding. Epinephrine is a weak platelet agonist and relies on your thromboxane A2 amplification. It's the same pathway that is used by your aspirin, so this can be used to figure out if your aspirin is functional or not. ADP cartridge is used because it activates your P2Y1 and P2Y12 receptors, which are used by your clopidogrel. So you can use this cartridge to see if clopidogrel is working or not. This is also helpful in diagnosing your von Willebrand factor disease and other severe platelet dysfunction. So if your call AP and call ADP are normal, that tells you that your platelet functions are normal. If you're taking aspirin, your call AP should be high and call ADP should be normal. But if both are normal and you're taking aspirin, that suggests aspirin resistance. If both call AP and call ADP are high, that would be suggestive of von Willebrand disease, or the patient is on P2Y1 inhibitors like clopidogrel. Patient with uremia or severe platelet dysfunction will be also positive. Patients with LVADs or severe AS having von Willebrand factor syndrome type 2A will also have elevated call AP and call ADP. If call ADP is normal while you're taking clopidogrel, that would suggest of clopidogrel resistance. Now the results are only valid if your hematocrit is more than 30% and platelet count is more than 100. What about using TEG or ROTEM to evaluate for platelet function? Now TEG and ROTEM do look at platelet function, but they look at its interaction with fibrin and not with von Willebrand factor. If you remember in TEG, you put a pin in the whole blood and oscillate it gently and wait for the fibrin strands to form. This does not check for the shear dependence adhesion of platelets. So what about platelet mapping on TEG or ROTEM? Now platelet mapping on TEG and ROTEM are tests to quantify how much platelet contribute to clot strength through the receptor pathways, and it's used to check the function of aspirin or clopidogrel. So you can get the max clot strength using fibrin-only channel, and say for example your patient was on aspirin, you should see a reduced clot strength, and that would mean that aspirin is working fine. However, if your clot strength is higher, that would mean aspirin resistance. So TEG and platelet mapping is unable to diagnose the von Willebrand factor and platelet interaction issues. And this can be shown in this simple figure, where you can see that PFA 100 is checking for von Willebrand factor and glycoprotein 1B interaction, while the TEG platelet mapping looks at your interaction between fibrinogen and platelets and how aspirin or Plavix affects this interaction. Both of the tests would give a good answer to the question if your aspirin or clopidogrel is working fine or not. So we learned that PT, APTT, platelet count, and TEG do not test for high shear vascular failure. So how do you figure out if shear issues are the cause of bleeding? To go on about diagnosing shear issues as a cause of bleeding, you have to be both clinical and use some tests. First, you have to figure out if the bleeding in your patient is low shear bleeding or high shear bleeding. So the patient with angiodyspasias, arteriolar bleeding, LVADs, aortic stenosis, these are high shear areas with high shear bleeding, versus patient with vasoplasia, autonomic dysfunction, sepsis, etc. These are low shear bleeding. You can check your PFA 100 to evaluate the platelet von Willebrand factor interaction. So let's summarize. The effect of shear stress on clotting and bleeding depend upon its intensity. At moderate shear, it is antithrombotic due to continuous production of nitric oxide and prostaglandin I2. If you got low or oscillatory shear, the area becomes more prothrombotic. If your shear increases, initially it will activate clotting by unfolding von Willebrand factor and platelets, but increasing shear to pathological level will cause damage to the vessel wall and pathologic platelet activation and hyper unfolding of von Willebrand factor, thereby promoting its degradation by ADAMTS13. Therefore, this can result in bleeding. So we have learned a lot about shear stress. One of the other role of the shear stress is its understanding into when to use antiplatelets versus anticoagulation. So you would have observed that you don't use anticoagulation for stroke or heart attack prophylaxis. It's always some antiplatelet agent. While for DVTs and PEs, you always use anticoagulation and avoid antiplatelet agent. We'll understand why that happens in the next lecture. Thank you.